In the blood-soaked trenches of World War I, fate tests a battle-hardened medic's soul. As dawn approaches on the Western Front, he cradles his dying friend in trembling arms, their brotherhood forged in the crucible of war now facing its final test. Around them, the night grows unnaturally still, a stillness that veterans know too well. Through his field glasses, he spots them, waves of German soldiers preparing for a massive dawn assault. His unit is scattered, their lines paper-thin, and his own wounds are sapping what little strength remains. But this medic harbors a secret that could turn the tide, if only he can find the courage to leave his friend's side. What would you choose, staying with your dying brother in arms, or rising to save 100 more? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The photograph sat in James Morton's breast pocket, edges worn smooth from countless touches. In it, 3 figures stood before a handsome London townhouse, himself looking properly dignified in his physician's best suit, his wife Margaret, elegant even in the grainy sepia tones, and their son William, barely 17, wearing his school cricket whites. The image captured a spring morning in 1914, mere months before the world changed forever. James traced his thumb across the familiar creases, careful not to let the precious paper catch on his rough, calloused hands. Hands that had grown accustomed to far different work than the delicate surgeries of his Harley Street practice. At 45, he was old enough to have avoided service entirely. A respected physician serves better at home, the recruitment officer had said, practically begging him to remain in London, where his skills could tend to the wounded who made it back from the front. But James couldn't stay behind, not after William enlisted. His boy, barely 18, had marched off to war with the same bright idealism that had sent thousands of young men to the trenches. When the telegram came 3 months later, James was performing surgery. Margaret had waited until he finished, knowing he would need steady hands for his patient. Their son had died leading a charge at Ypres, earning a posthumous military cross that arrived in a neat wooden box, offering cold comfort for their loss. 2 weeks later, James enlisted. Margaret didn't try to stop him. She understood that this wasn't about revenge or even patriotic duty. It was about finding purpose in their shared grief. His age and medical credentials earned him an immediate commission as a field medic. The army needed experienced doctors desperately, though they carefully avoided mentioning how few survived their first month in the trenches. The training had been cursory, a few weeks of military protocol and field medicine techniques that seemed primitive compared to his surgical expertise. But James learned quickly that saving lives in the mud and chaos of no man's land required a different kind of medicine altogether. Precision gave way to improvisation, sterile technique to desperate necessity. He learned to staunch bleeding with mud-caked bandages, to diagnose by touch in the darkness of shell holes, to prioritize the salvageable over the dying. His fellow soldiers initially viewed him with the usual skepticism reserved for older volunteers, but his calm competence under fire soon earned their respect. While other medics froze or broke, James moved with steady purpose through artillery barrages, his experience allowing him to work efficiently even as shells burst around him. He had nothing left to fear. His greatest loss had already come by: telegram. Now, 3 years into the war, he had treated thousands of wounded men, some barely half William's age. Each young face brought a fresh echo of grief, but also a chance for redemption. Every life saved felt like a small victory against the senseless waste that had claimed his son. He couldn't stop this war, but he could fight it his own way, with bandages and morphine instead of bullets and bayonets. The photograph was his talisman, a reminder of who he had been before the war stripped away everything but his essential purpose. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between artillery barrages, he would study the faces of his lost world, Margaret's gentle smile, William's proud stance, his own unknowing expression. They looked like strangers now, these people who had never heard an artillery shell or smelled the sweet sick stench of gangrene. But he kept the photo close, even as its edges frayed and its surface grew stained with the mud and blood that marked everything in the trenches. A distant explosion brought James back to the present. He carefully tucked the photograph away and checked his medical kit. Morphine running low, bandages almost gone, but enough for one more day. One more day of patching together broken men and sending them back to be broken again. One more day of playing God in the mud, choosing who might live and who must be left to die. One more day of carrying William's memory through the valley of death, seeking absolution in each life saved. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed from the line. James grabbed his kit and stood, ignoring the protest of tired muscles. Somewhere, in the darkness, another young man lay wounded, another mother's son crying out in pain. He had work to do. Thomas Bennett wasn't like the other young soldiers. While they spoke of glory and victory, Tommy talked about his father's watchmaking shop in Manchester, describing the delicate mechanisms with the same precision he used to field strip his rifle. He had a watchmaker's hands and a storyteller's soul, finding beauty in the most unlikely corners of their muddy hell. James met him during the Somme offensive, pulling the young private from a flooded shell crater. Tommy had a nasty chest wound, but he stayed conscious through the whole extraction, keeping up a steady stream of commentary about the peculiar way the morning light filtered through the mist. Like God's own pocket watch, all gears of gold, he'd said, delirious from blood loss, but still noticing the details others missed. Against the odds, Tommy survived. During his recovery, he and James discovered a shared appreciation for life's quiet moments. Between Tommy's pocket watch repairs for the other soldiers and James's medical rounds, they would share cups of thin army tea and talk about everything except the war. Tommy showed James how to spot larks nesting in the trench walls, while James taught him basic field medicine, knowledge that would save more than a few lives in the months ahead. Their unlikely friendship became a source of gentle amusement among the men. The aging doctor and the young watchmaker, swapping stories and skills in the brief respites between battles. They wore their differences like badges of honor, James with his formal London manners, Tommy with his cheerful Manchester pragmatism. Yet beneath the surface, they recognized in each other the same essential quality, a determination to preserve something human in the midst of mechanized slaughter. Tommy carried a small notebook where he sketched whatever caught his eye, a particularly intricate piece of barbed wire, the pattern of shadows cast by a broken wagon, the way soldiers huddled around braziers in the pre-dawn chill. His drawings captured the war's quieter moments, the human scenes that official photographs missed. He gave most of them away to fellow soldiers to send home, but he kept a few special ones, including a careful study of James tending to a wounded man, his face a mask of concentration. "You've got healing hands, Doc," Tommy once said, watching. "James splint a broken arm, like my father with his watches. You know exactly which parts need touching and which should be left alone." The comparison stuck with James, helping him think of each patient as an intricate mechanism that could be set right with proper care and patience. They shared their stories too during the long night watches. James spoke of William, finding that the pain eased somewhat in the telling. Tommy talked about his family's shop, 4 generations of Bennets keeping Manchester's timepieces ticking. He'd apprenticed under his father since age 12, learning to hear the music in the mechanical rhythms of gears and springs. "War's got its own rhythm," Tommy observed one night, head cocked as distant artillery fire rolled across no man's land. "But it's all wrong, like a watch with sand in its gears. Needs proper fixing, it does." It was the closest he ever came to commenting on the futility of their situation. Their dog tags clinked together the day they made their pact. After a particularly bad shelling that left half their platoon dead or wounded, they promised to look out for each other, to make sure that if the worst happened, someone would be there at the end. They sealed the promise by linking their identity. Tags temporarily, the metal discs chiming like tiny bells. "Proper pair we make," Tommy had grinned, his face streaked with mud and gunpowder. The doctor and the watchmaker keeping things ticking along. James had smiled back, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced since losing William. It wasn't the same, nothing could replace his son, but Tommy's friendship had helped him remember how to live rather than merely survive. Neither of them spoke about the obvious, that such promises were dangerous things in a war that devoured the young and spared the old with arbitrary cruelty. They simply carried on day by day, patrol by patrol, each watching over the other, with the same care they devoted to their respective crafts. Time moved strangely in the trenches, stretching and contracting like a faulty chronometer, but their friendship remained constant, marking the hours until the next battle, the next wound, the next chance to prove that humanity could survive even here, in this landscape of mud and death. The map spread across the dugout table told its own story. Pencil marks tracked enemy movements, each notation representing observed German patrols, artillery positions, and troop concentrations. James studied the patterns, while Captain Harrison pointed out the latest intelligence. "They're building up. For something big," the captain said, his finger tracing the line where no man's land separated the opposing forces. "Past 3 nights, our listening posts have reported increased activity. Supply wagons, troops movements, the works." James nodded, recognizing the signs from previous offensives. The Germans were methodical in their preparations, like a patient showing symptoms before a fever broke. "How many men can we field?" he asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't. "Be enough. 243 effectives," Harrison replied, his voice tight. "Barely enough to hold the line if they come in force." He didn't need to add that reinforcements were unlikely. Every sector was stretched thin. The dugout's candlelight flickered as a distant explosion rattled the timber supports. Both men instinctively ducked, then straightened with embarrassed smiles. Just ranging fire, routine as sunrise. But there was nothing routine about the tension in the air. Tommy entered, bringing the damp night air with him. "Finished my patrol, sir," he reported to Harrison, then turned to James. "Doc, you might want to check on Peters in the forward sap. His cough's getting worse." James gathered his medical kit, but Harrison held up a hand. "Before you go, both of you should know. We've lost contact with the listening post in Sector 4. Could be nothing, could be wire damage, but it could be infiltrators," Tommy finished. He pulled out his notebook, sketching a quick map of the sector. "There's a low spot here behind the old crater, perfect blind spot for their patrols." The 3 men leaned over Tommy's drawing, their shadows merging on the dugout wall. James marveled at the young man's memory for terrain, every shell hole and wire tangled precisely placed. It reminded him of the anatomical drawings he'd studied in medical school, but these charts mapped wounds in the earth rather than human flesh. "Double the watch tonight," Harrison ordered. "And Doc, after you see to Peters, check our ammunition stores. I want every man to have extra bandoliers before dawn." They emerged into the trench proper, where the night hung heavy with unusual stillness. No machine gun bursts, no flares, even the artillery had fallen silent, like the quiet in a sick room, when the patient takes a turn for the worse. "Don't like it," Tommy muttered, adjusting his rifle strap. "Too quiet by half, like that time at Arras, remember?" James remembered. The silence before the German flame troops came, turning their sector into an inferno. They'd lost 30 men in as many minutes. "Keep your mask close," he advised. "And, Tommy, mind how you go." They parted ways, Tommy heading to his post, James toward the forward sap, where Peters waited with his worsening cough. The communication trench felt longer than usual, each step measured by the soft squelch of mud. Rats scattered ahead of him, their eyes catching the dim starlight. At intervals, James passed soldiers at their posts, each man tense and watchful. They nodded to him, taking comfort in the familiar sight of their medic making rounds. He knew, most of them by name, had stitched their wounds and eased their pains. Too many were replacements, fresh-faced boys filling gaps left by the dead. They reminded him of William, of course. Everything did. Peter's cough turned out to be bronchitis, treatable with rest he couldn't be given, and medicine James was running. A short on. He did what he could, making a mental note to request more supplies at the next opportunity, if there was a next opportunity. Returning to his aid post, James paused to look over the parapet. The moon had risen, casting just enough light to reveal the tortured landscape of no man's land. Shells had churned the earth into a chaos of craters and tangles, but tonight it seemed almost peaceful, like a garden gone wonderfully to seed. Then he saw it, a flash of movement quickly stilled. Another. The enemy was out there, probing their lines, measuring distances, planning their paths of attack. Tomorrow would bring blood and fire. But for now, in this strange calm, James could only wait and watch as the night grew older and dawn crept ever closer. The first shell arrived at 3:47 a.m. Tommy's pocket watch recorded the moment precisely, its hands freezing as the blast knocked it from his grip. The timepiece skittered across the fire step, landing face up in the mud, its cracked crystal reflecting the sudden hellish light of the barrage. James was already moving when the second shell hit. Years of experience had taught him the pattern. The ranging shot, followed by the full fury of the guns. "Down!" he shouted, pulling a young private into the dugout's shelter. The boy's face showed the wide-eyed terror of the uninitiated. But there was no time for comfort. The German artillery painted the pre-dawn sky with fire. Shells screamed overhead, their sound like giant keys scraping across the world's largest piano wire. Each impact sent tremors through the earth, rattling teeth and bones. The trenches groaned under the assault, timber supports cracking like ancient trees in a storm. "They're walking it back," someone screamed. James recognized Sergeant Miller's voice, steady despite the chaos. "Everyone in the deep shelters, move!" But it was too late for an orderly withdrawal. A direct hit collapsed part of the communication trench, trapping men in the forward positions. Through the smoke and debris, James could see soldiers scrambling for whatever cover they could find. Some made it to the dugouts. Others huddled in shell holes, cursing and praying in equal measure. Tommy appeared through the chaos, helping a wounded man toward James's position. They were halfway across the exposed stretch when a shell burst directly overhead. The explosion seemed to pause time itself, a tableau of flying earth and metal frozen in an instant of perfect clarity. Then reality rushed back in, and both men went down. James didn't remember crossing the distance between them. Training took over, his body moving with automatic precision, while his mind registered details with clinical detachment. Tommy lay curled around the man he'd been helping, having used his own body as a shield. The other soldier was dead, his chest torn open by shrapnel. But Tommy was breathing, conscious, his eyes focusing on James with remarkable clarity. "Bit of a mess, eh, Doc?" Tommy managed, trying to smile. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth, a bad sign. James's hands moved quickly, finding the wounds. Shrapnel had torn through Tommy's back, penetrating deep. The bleeding was severe, but it was the sucking chest wound that worried him most. "Just lie still," James ordered, pulling supplies from his medical kit. He worked mechanically, applying pressure bandages, checking vital signs, all while shells continued to explode around them. A piece of shrapnel zinged past his ear, but he barely noticed. "My watch," Tommy gasped. "Did you see where it fell?" "Never mind that now." James administered morphine, his hands steady despite the tremors running through the ground. "You need to stay quiet and still." The barrage was reaching its crescendo. Through the drum of explosions came new sounds, whistles, shouts in German, the distinctive rattle of machine guns opening up. The attack proper was beginning. "Contact front!" The cry went up along the line. "They're coming over!" James risked a glance over the parapet. Through gaps in the smoke and dust, he could see them, waves of German infantry advancing behind their rolling barrage. Their grey uniforms blended with the pre-dawn gloom, making them seem like ghosts materializing from the mist. "You'll need to move me," Tommy said, his voice weaker but still determined. "Can't leave me here in the open." He was right. They were too exposed, and the German infantry would reach their position soon. James looked around, evaluating options. The nearest dugout was 30 yards away, its entrance partially collapsed, but still accessible. Moving Tommy would be risky. The wounds were severe, and any movement could worsen them, but staying put meant certain death for both of them. "This is going to hurt," James warned, preparing to lift his friend. Tommy's laugh turned into a cough, spraying blood. "Everything hurts already, Doc. Don't waste time being gentle." James had carried many wounded men during his time at the front, but none had felt as precious as Tommy. He lifted carefully but quickly, trying to keep the younger man's body level. Tommy bit back a scream, his face going even paler. Together, they began the agonizing journey toward the dugout. The German infantry was closing fast. Machine gun fire raked the trenches, forcing James to move in a low crouch. Each step was a battle against mud and gravity, each moment an eternity of exposed vulnerability. Bullets cracked past them, uncomfortably close. A shell burst nearby, showering them with dirt and fragments. They were almost to the dugout when James felt the impact. At first it seemed like just another piece of flying debris hitting his shoulder. But then came the burning sensation, followed by a weakness that made his legs buckle. He stumbled, nearly dropping Tommy, but managed to keep going through sheer determination. Finally, they reached the dugout's entrance. Hands reached out to help them inside, Sergeant Miller and 2 privates James didn't recognize. They lay Tommy on a rough wooden bench, while James slumped against the wall, his own wound finally demanding attention. In the dugout's dim light, James could properly assess Tommy's condition. It wasn't good. The chest wound was worse than he'd first thought, and internal bleeding was already causing Tommy's extremities to grow cold. The young man needed immediate surgery, but they were cut off from the field hospital, trapped in a collapsing sector of the line with the enemy advancing. Tommy seemed to read his thoughts. "Not going to make it this time, am I, Doc?" Before James could answer, another explosion rocked the dugout. Dirt sifted down from the ceiling as German voices became audible outside, shouting orders and coordinates. The attack was overwhelming. Their position. Soon, they would be overrun. Sergeant Miller appeared at James's side. "Sir, we've got wounded all along the line. No one else to tend them. We need you." James looked at Tommy, then at his medical kit, mentally counting his remaining supplies. Not enough. Never enough. The weight of his responsibility pressed down harder than the earth above them, harder than the pain in his shoulder. Tommy reached out, his watchmaker's hands trembling but still precise, and gripped James's arm. "Go," he whispered. "They need you more than I do now." The choice that wasn't a choice at all began to take shape in James's mind, even as his heart fought against its cruel logic. There were others he might save, others he had sworn to protect. But leaving Tommy went against everything he believed, everything he had promised. In the distance, a new sound rose above the chaos of battle, the approaching rumble of boots, thousands of them, as the main German assault force moved through their broken lines. Captain Harrison's final orders arrived with a runner who'd crawled through 200 yards of German fire to deliver them. The young soldier's uniform was caked with mud and blood, not all of it his own, and his eyes held the wild look of someone who'd seen too much in too little time. "Sir," he gasped, handing James a blood-smeared envelope. "Captain's dead. Artillery got the command post. He wrote this just before—" The runner's voice trailed off as he slumped against the dugout wall, exhaustion finally claiming him. James's shoulder burned as he broke the seal, but he forced his hands to remain steady. The message inside was brief, written in Harrison's precise hand. "Hold the line at all costs. Reinforcements promised within hours. Position critical to core defense. Every minute gained saves hundreds. God be with you, Harrison." The words seemed to pulse with their own gravity. James had seen enough battles to understand what wasn't written. This position was a linchpin. If it fell too quickly, the entire sector could collapse, threatening thousands of lives along miles of front. Tommy stirred on his makeshift bed, consciousness floating in and out like a tide. "What's the word, Doc?" he managed, his voice barely. "A whisper. Rest," James said, tucking the orders into his pocket. But Tommy knew him too well. "Bad news doesn't improve with age," Tommy quoted, something James had often said while treating wounds. "Out with it." Before James could respond, Sergeant Miller appeared at the dugout entrance. "Sir, Germans have broken through on the left. Fletcher's section is cut off. We need a decision." The weight of command settled onto James's shoulders, heavier than any medical bag he'd ever carried. He was the senior officer now, a field medic suddenly responsible for tactical decisions that would determine who lived and who died. His wound throbbed, a hot poker of pain driven deep into muscle and bone. The bullet had passed through cleanly, but without proper treatment, infection was inevitable. Already he could feel the weakness spreading down his arm, making every movement a study in controlled agony. "How many wounded?" James asked Miller. 17 mobile, 8 serious but transportable. 3, Miller glanced at Tommy, 3 critical. The mathematics of triage was familiar to James, cold calculations of who might live with treatment, who would die without it, who was beyond help. But he'd never had to apply that logic to Tommy, never to a friend who'd shared his tea and stories, who'd drawn pictures of larks in the quiet hours before dawn. "Sir," Miller pressed, "we're almost out of ammunition. If we're going to pull back, it has to be now." A memory surfaced, William's last letter home, full of bright courage and simple faith. "Don't worry, Father. I know my duty." His son had died leading his men, choosing obligation over safety. Now James faced a similar choice. Tommy's breathing had grown more labored. The terrible sucking sound from his chest wound louder in the confined space. Even with immediate surgery, his chances were slim. Without it, "Doc," Tommy called, stronger now. He'd been listening, understanding everything that wasn't being said. "Remember that watch you asked about, the one that fell?" James knelt beside him, ignoring the protest from his shoulder. "Save your strength." "Time's funny in a watch," Tommy continued, his watchmaker's mind still turning even as his body failed. "Every second precious, but some matter more than others. Some moments you have to sacrifice to keep the whole thing running." Their eyes met in the dim light. In Tommy's gaze, James saw not fear but acceptance, the same quiet courage he'd shown sketching birds while shells fell around them. A fresh burst of machine gun fire rattled above, followed by shouts in German. Closer now. Time, that precious commodity Tommy knew so well, was running out. James had to choose, stay with his dying friend or lead the defense that might save hundreds. The answer was there in Tommy's eyes, in Harrison's orders, in the memory of William's sacrifice. But knowing the right choice didn't make it any easier to bear. Sergeant Miller waited by the entrance, the fate of 17 wounded men hanging on James's next words. Outside, the German advance continued, measuring out the moments until their position would be overrun. And on his rough wooden bed, Tommy watched his friend with the patient understanding of someone who had always known how this story would end. The memory came unbidden. A sunlit room in Edinburgh, 40 young doctors-to-be standing straight-backed before their professors. James could still recite the words of the Hippocratic Oath, each phrase etched into his conscience as deeply as the shrapnel scars that now marked his body. "I swear to fulfill to the best of my ability and judgment this covenant." His first patient death had come just weeks after taking that oath. A young woman, not much older than William had been, bleeding out on his table despite everything. He knew everything he tried. He'd written to her family afterward, explaining how he'd done all he could. The words had felt hollow then, just as they did now. Another explosion rocked the dugout. The timber supports groaned, and more dirt sifted down from above. Through the entrance, James could see the eastern sky beginning to lighten. Dawn was coming, bringing with it the full weight of the German assault. "You're thinking too hard," Tommy said softly. His breathing had grown more labored, but his mind remained sharp. "Can always tell when you're wrestling with something. You get that same look you had at Passchendaele just before you ran out to get Davies." Davies. Another memory. A young corporal caught in wire during an attack. James had crawled out under heavy fire to reach him, driven by that same oath that now seemed to pull him in two directions at once. "First, do no harm," he whispered, the words bitter in his mouth. Tommy managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "Bit late for that, isn't it? Whole war's nothing but harm." James checked Tommy's bandages, his hands moving with professional detachment while his heart ached. The bleeding had slowed, but that was no comfort. It meant there was less blood left to lose. "Remember what you told me," Tommy continued, "about your first surgery, how you learned that sometimes you have to hurt someone to heal them." Of course he remembered. It had been one of their long night conversations, sharing the wisdom of their respective crafts. He'd explained how surgical pain was sometimes necessary for healing, just as Tommy had described having to break down a watch completely to repair it properly. "Different kind of hurt now, though," James said, his voice rough. "Same principle." Tommy's words were growing fainter, requiring more effort. "Sometimes you have to accept one loss to prevent a greater one." The distant crack of rifle fire was drawing closer. Sergeant Miller appeared again at the entrance, his face grave. "Sir, Germans are pushing hard on the right now. Our lads are running low on ammunition." James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his medical bag, the pressure of Harrison's orders in his pocket, the burn of his own wound. The oath he'd taken in Edinburgh seemed to whisper in his ear, competing with the memory of William's last letter and Tommy's labored breathing. His medical training argued for staying. Tommy needed constant attention to have any chance at all. But his military experience showed him the larger picture. Without leadership, without someone to coordinate their defense and treat the wounded who might survive, this entire section of the line would crumble. The more experienced doctor in him, the one who'd learned the hardest lessons of triage during 3 years of war, knew that Tommy was beyond saving. Even if they had access to a field hospital, even if they weren't cut off and under attack, the internal damage was too severe. By any medical calculation, staying with him meant sacrificing the lives of others who could be saved. Yet that clinical logic did nothing to ease the personal anguish. This wasn't just any patient, this was Tommy, who'd shared his tea and his stories, who'd helped him remember how to laugh after William's death. "Doc," Tommy called, his voice suddenly stronger, more urgent. "Listen, need to tell you something." James leaned closer, his ear near Tommy's lips. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder, but in that moment, all he could hear was his friend's fading voice, sharing one last piece of wisdom about time and duty and the price of keeping the worlds. Machinery running. Lieutenant Barker's insignia was still bright, barely worn before a sniper's bullet had found him. Now James pinned the rank to his own mud-stained collar, each small movement sending fresh waves of pain through his wounded shoulder. The metal felt impossibly heavy, as if weighted with the lives it represented. "Distribute the remaining ammunition," he ordered Miller, his voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. "Priority to the machine gun positions. How many grenades do we have left?" 37 Mills bombs, sir, scattered among the sections." James nodded, his medical mind automatically converting the numbers into potential casualties, both inflicted and sustained. The mathematics of warfare wasn't so different from triage. Resources versus needs, probability versus certainty, the cold equations of who might live and who must die. "Get them to the forward positions," he said. "And Miller, tell the men to fix bayonets. They'll need to know we're prepared for close work. The sergeant's face remained professional, but James saw the understanding in his eyes. Fixed bayonets meant they expected the enemy to reach their trenches. It was an admission that their thin line might not hold back the German tide. From his position near the dugout entrance, James could survey most of their remaining defenses. The pre-dawn light revealed the damage from the artillery barrage. Collapsed. Trenches, broken duckboards, wounded men being helped to whatever cover remained. But he also saw determination in the way the soldiers moved, a stubborn professionalism that refused to yield to despair. Tommy's voice drifted from inside the dugout, weaker now but still clear. "You sound different. More like an officer." "Had a good teacher," James replied, ducking back inside. "Captain Harrison knew how to lead men." "Not Harrison," Tommy managed a small smile. "William, you sound like you described him. In his letters." The comparison struck James like a physical blow. He hadn't thought of it, but Tommy was right. William's last letter had been full of quiet authority, describing how he kept his men's spirits up before the attack that would claim his life. Now James found himself using some of the same phrases, the same tone of calm certainty in the face of overwhelming odds. A runner appeared, his message adding another weight to James's shoulders. The Germans had taken the forward listening post. They would be coming through that sector soon, exploiting the gap in their lines. He had to make decisions quickly now, had to think like a commander rather than a doctor. "Move the walking wounded to the secondary trench," he ordered. "Anyone who can hold a rifle gets one. Set up a crossfire position to cover the gap." The words came automatically, lessons from his brief officer training mixing with 3 years of battlefield experience. But even as he gave orders, his medical training assessed each man who passed. Shock starting to set in there, possible concussion. There, that one hiding a shrapnel wound that needed attention. The doctor in him wanted to stop, to treat, to heal. The commander had to send them back into position, knowing that some would not survive the coming dawn. "Sir," another runner, this one breathing hard. "Germans massing in the old crater. Looks like they're preparing to rush our position." James turned to Miller. "Get me a count of our effective fighting strength, every man who can stand, every weapon that still fires." The sergeant nodded and disappeared into the growing light. The weight of command pressed down, demanding decisions. That would mean life or death for the men who now looked to him for leadership. William had borne this weight. Harrison had borne it. Now it fell to James, a doctor who had sworn to preserve life, to send men into death's teeth. From somewhere down the line came the distinctive chatter of their last Vickers gun. The sound, already becoming sporadic as ammunition ran low, time was running out. Soon the Germans would come, and all his decisions would be tested in blood and fire. Behind him, in the dugout shadows, Tommy's breathing grew more labored. The sound seemed to measure out the moments like his beloved pocket watch, counting. Down to a dawn that would change everything. In the dugout's dim light, Tommy fumbled with his notebook, his normally precise hands shaking as he tried to tear out a page. "Need you to send this one home," he said, pressing the paper into James's hands. "It's for my father." James glanced at the drawing, a beautifully detailed sketch of their trench at sunrise, with soldiers warming themselves around a brazier. But Tommy had added something special to this one. A broken pocket watch in the foreground, its exposed gears catching the first light of dawn. "Was working on it last few days," Tommy explained between labored breaths. "Wanted to show him how I've been using what he taught me. Even here, he'll be proud," James said, carefully folding the paper into his breast pocket alongside William's photograph. The two memories would rest together now, close to his heart. "There's a letter too," Tommy continued, "in my kit. Started writing it yesterday." He tried to laugh, but coughed instead, flecks of blood staining his lips. "Funny how you never finish the important letters. Always think there'll be more time." James checked Tommy's pulse. Thready, irregular. The internal bleeding was worse. Even with his medical kit running low, he had enough morphine left to ease his friend's pain, but using it would mean less for others who might still be saved. "Should save it," Tommy said, reading his thoughts. "Never could hide anything from a watchmaker's eyes. We see all the little tells, all the small movements that show what's really happening inside." A shell burst nearby, closer than the others. The Germans were ranging their guns again, preparing for the next phase of their attack. Through the dugout entrance, James could see the sky beginning to lighten. Soon the enemy would come, and all his impossible choices would become final. "Tell me about William," Tommy said suddenly. Not how he died. Tell me something happy, something from before." James settled beside his friend, trying to find a comfortable position that wouldn't strain his wounded shoulder. "He loved cricket," he began, the memory coming easily now. "Had a natural talent for it, but what he loved most was teaching the younger boys at his school. Would spend hours in the nets with them, showing them how to hold the bat, how to watch. The ball, like you," Tommy interrupted, "teaching me field medicine, always patient, always clear. He got that from his mother," James smiled. "Margaret was a teacher before we married. She always said that knowledge was a gift that grew larger when you shared it." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of men preparing for battle. Someone was checking. The machine gun, cycling its action with mechanical clicks that reminded James of Tommy's watches. "I've been thinking," Tommy said, his voice growing fainter, "about time, about how it moves differently for different people. Like now, these moments with you, they're worth whole days of ordinary time." "Save your strength," James advised, but Tommy shook his head. "Need to say this. When I repair watches, sometimes a gear is too damaged. Has to be sacrificed to save the whole mechanism, but its sacrifice, it means something, makes everything else work properly again." He gripped James's arm with surprising strength. Understanding that helps make sense of things. The implications were clear. Tommy wasn't just talking about watches anymore. He was offering absolution for the choice they both knew James would. "Don't have to make. My father always said," Tommy continued, fighting for each word now, "that the true art of watchmaking isn't in the grand complications. It's in knowing which small adjustments will keep the whole thing running true. You understand that better than anyone I've known." Another explosion rocked the dugout, and urgent voices called from outside. The Germans were moving. Decisions could no longer be postponed. "Doc," Tommy said, his voice barely a whisper now, "before you go, need you to know something. These past months, having you as a friend, it's been like having a father again. Wanted to tell you that, while I still had time." James felt tears threatening for the first time since William's death. He squeezed Tommy's hand, trying to pour all his unspoken feelings into that simple gesture. Here was another son being taken from him, another bright light about to be extinguished by this senseless war. But Tommy wasn't finished. With the last of his strength, he pressed something into James's palm, his prized screwdriver, the one he used for the most delicate watch repairs. "For the next broken thing. That needs fixing," he whispered. "So you'll remember, some parts are worth more than others." The wound in James's shoulder had its own heartbeat now, each pulse sending waves of fire through his chest and arm. He'd seen enough battlefield injuries to know what was happening. Shock setting in, the first signs of infection beginning to take hold. His medical training catalogued the symptoms with clinical detachment, even as his body struggled against them. The last morphine syringe in his kit seemed to vibrate with possibility. One quick injection would dull the pain, clear his mind, help him focus on the tactical decisions ahead. But it would also mean one less dose for the wounded, one less chance to ease another soldier's suffering. He tucked it back into the kit. Unopened. "Stubborn old fool," Tommy murmured from his cot, drifting in and out of consciousness. "Always taking care of everyone but yourself." James managed a smile, though Tommy's eyes were closed and couldn't see it. "Learned that from my patients. especially the stubborn young ones who won't stay still when they're told. His attempt at humor fell flat as another wave of pain crashed through him. The bullet wound was bad enough, but now his whole left side felt heavy, unresponsive. If he didn't get proper medical attention soon, but that thought led nowhere useful. There would be no relief until the battle was decided one way or another. Sergeant Miller appeared at the dugout entrance, his face ghostly in the growing light. "Sir, you need to see this." James pushed himself up, using his good arm to steady himself against the rough wall. The world swam for a moment, darkness threatening the edges of his vision. He breathed deeply, forcing his body to obey through sheer will. The scene outside was a study in controlled chaos. Walking wounded helped prepare defenses, passing ammunition, and filling sandbags despite their injuries. The less mobile were being moved to safer positions, each man bearing his pain with stoic determination. They were soldiers first, wounded second, a distinction James understood all too well now. Miller pointed to the German lines. "They're forming up behind the ridge. Must be at least a company strength, maybe more." James raised his field glasses, ignoring how his trembling hands made the image jump. The enemy soldiers were indeed massing, their grey uniforms blending with the pre-dawn mist. But something about their formation nagged at his battlefield experience. "They're too bunched up," he realized. Unless the implications hit him. Like another shell burst. Unless they know exactly where our weak points are, the listening post, they must have taken prisoners. His mind raced, trying to think through the tactical situation, despite the fever he could feel building. The Germans would know about their ammunition shortages, their depleted numbers. This wouldn't be a probing attack. It would be an all-out assault designed to shatter their already crumbling defenses. "Get me a runner," he ordered. "We need to warn the flanking units." But even as he spoke, he knew it might be too late. The enemy had chosen their moment well. Back in the dugout, he checked Tommy one last time. His friend's breathing had grown, even more labored. Each intake of air a visible struggle. The chest wound was beyond anything their limited medical supplies could handle. Without immediate surgery, James's own wound seemed to pulse in sympathy. He was a doctor. He knew exactly what was happening to both of them. Internal damage spreading, infection taking hold, the body's systems beginning to fail, one by one. It was a race now, between their failing bodies and the advancing enemy, between duty and death. He found himself thinking of William again, of all the times he'd treated his son's cricket injuries. Minor sprains and cuts that had seemed so important then. What he wouldn't give now to be back in that sunlit garden, wrapping a bandage around his boy's scraped knee, everything simple and healable and right. But there was nothing simple about this moment. His medical training warred with his military duty, each step causing fresh pain, each decision weighted with consequences he could barely comprehend through his growing fever. The enemy wasn't just advancing across no man's land. It was inside him, in his wound, in his doubts, in the terrible choice he would have to make. Tommy stirred again, his watchmaker's eyes somehow finding James in the dimness. "Time's running out, isn't it?" he whispered. "For both of us." The German helmet lay in the mud, like a fallen moon, its dull steel surface reflecting the growing dawn light. James studied it through his field glasses, noting the unit markings that told a story more ominous than he'd first suspected. This wasn't just any attacking force. These were Stoßtruppen, elite stormtroopers specially trained for breakthrough operations. "Brought it in 10 minutes ago," Miller reported. "Forward scout found it near the listening post. There's more, sir." He handed James a document taken from a dead German officer, a detailed attack plan, complete with maps and timing schedules. The paper trembled in James's good hand as he read, his shoulder wound making even this simple task an exercise in endurance. The German preparations were more extensive than anyone had guessed. This wasn't just another probing attack. It was the spearhead of a major offensive aimed directly at their weakened sector. "How much of this can you read?" he asked Miller, gesturing to the German text. "Enough to know we're in trouble, sir. They've got our positions marked, down to the last machine gun nest. Must have been planning this for weeks." James nodded, his medical mind automatically calculating casualties based on the force ratios shown in the German documents. The numbers were devastating. Without reinforcements, their casualties would be total. But if they could hold just long enough, if they could delay the German advance until support arrived, a series of sharp cracks split the air, rifle fire from their forward positions. The Germans were testing their lines, probing for weaknesses. Through his field glasses, James could see enemy soldiers crawling through gaps in the wire, their movements precise and practiced. These were veterans, men who knew every trick of trench warfare. "Get me a count of our ammunition," he ordered. "Every rifle round, every grenade, and find out if that Vickers gun on the left flank is still operational," while Miller went to gather the information. James forced himself to focus through his fever. The tactical situation was clear enough. They were outnumbered at least 5-1. Their ammunition was running low, and the enemy knew their weaknesses. But they had one advantage the Germans couldn't know about: the reinforcements promised. In Harrison's final orders, if they could hold out long enough, a sudden burst of machine gun fire cut through his thoughts. Through the pre-dawn mist, he could see German soldiers falling back from their wire. The first probe had been repulsed, but it was only the beginning. "Sir!" A runner appeared, breathing hard. "Sergeant Miller sent me. The Vickers is down to its last belt, and we're finding lots of dud ammunition in the rifle cartridges." Another problem. The bad ammunition would cost precious seconds in combat, maybe even get men killed when their rifles failed at crucial moments. James fought down a wave of dizziness as he considered their options. Back in the dugout, Tommy was sleeping fitfully, his breathing growing more labored. James checked his friend's pulse. Weaker now, but still fighting. Like their defensive position, Tommy was holding on through sheer determination. The German documents seemed to burn in his pocket, their contents forcing him toward decisions he'd hoped to avoid. The attack would come from multiple directions, targeting their weakest points. They didn't have enough men to cover every approach, which meant some positions would have to be sacrificed to reinforce others. More rifle fire erupted. Closer this time. James made his way to a forward observation point, each step sending fresh waves of pain through his wounded shoulder. The scene before him confirmed his worst fears. The Germans were moving up heavy weapons, preparing for their main assault. Through his field glasses, he could make out the details. Mortar teams setting up behind fallen trees, machine gun crews laying their final fields of fire, officers checking maps and synchronizing watches. The precision of their preparation was both professional and terrifying. A memory surfaced, William describing similar preparations before his final attack at Ypres. "Everything has to be timed perfectly, Father," he'd written. "One mistake, one delay, and the whole operation falls apart." The parallel struck James with fresh force. The Germans were operating on a strict timetable, every element carefully coordinated. If they could disrupt that timing, throw off their schedule even slightly, but such disruption would require men to expose themselves, to take positions that would become death traps once the main assault began. He would be sending soldiers to certain death to buy time for others to survive. More German helmets appeared through the mist, moving with the methodical confidence of troops who knew their superiority. Their stormtroopers were masters of infiltration tactics, finding gaps and weaknesses that regular soldiers might miss. Already they were working their way through the wire, cutting paths for the main force to follow. James felt the weight of Harrison's orders, the responsibility of command pressing down harder than his wounds. The tactical situation was deteriorating by the minute, but he could see the larger strategic picture now. This German attack was like a pocket watch's mechanisms. Every gear and spring had to move in perfect synchronization. Disrupt one element, and the whole operation might lose its crucial momentum. Miller returned with the ammunition count. The numbers were worse than expected, barely 50 rounds per man, with the Vickers gun down to its last belt. They had enough. Mills bombs to make the Germans cautious, but not enough to stop a determined assault. "Sir," Miller said quietly, "the men are asking, they want to know if help is coming." James looked at the sergeant, seeing the same question in his eyes. The men deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as he could share without breaking. In their resolve, Harrison promised reinforcements, he said carefully. "We hold until they arrive." But even as he spoke, he was calculating time and distance, matching the German attack schedule against Harrison's last orders. The numbers told a brutal story. They would have to hold out far longer than seemed possible with their remaining resources. Through the dugout entrance, he could see the sky lightening further. Soon, there would be enough light for the German artillery to begin its final preparatory bombardment. After that would come the infantry assault, waves of stormtroopers advancing behind a rolling barrage. Time was running out, like sand through an hourglass. Every decision now would mean life or death, not just for his men, but for the thousands of troops depending on their sector holding firm. The Germans had revealed their hand with the captured documents, but knowledge alone wasn't enough. They needed a plan, a way to use that information to maximum effect. James felt the weight of Tommy's screwdriver in his pocket, its precision tool now a reminder of the delicate adjustments that could change the course of events. Like a watchmaker making tiny corrections to keep time true, he would have to fine-tune their defenses, using their limited resources with surgical precision. The enemy was out there, beyond the wire, preparing their killing stroke. But armies, like pocket watches, could be disrupted by the smallest grain of sand in their gears. The question was, how many of his men would he have to sacrifice to throw that single grain? The medical armband on James's sleeve was almost black with blood, his own, Tommy's, and that of countless others he'd treated through the night. He stared at it now, this symbol of healing stained by war's reality, as he made his final checks. Of Tommy's condition, how bad, Tommy whispered, though they both knew the answer. "Bad enough," James replied, his professional mask slipping. "The internal bleeding won't last till dawn, will I?" Tommy's watchmaker's eyes were clear despite the pain, reading the truth in his friend's face. Before James could answer, Miller burst into the dugout. "Sir, they're moving up their heavy mortars. 10 minutes at most before they start their final." Barrage, time. It always came down to time. James looked at Tommy, then at the medical kit with its last precious morphine syringe. One final choice to make. "Doc," Tommy said, his voice stronger for a moment. "Remember what I said about watches? About sacrificing one part to save the whole?" He gripped James's good arm with surprising strength. "I've had my time, made my mark, even got to help mend some broken things along the way." The sounds of preparation grew louder outside, men moving to their final positions, ammunition being distributed, prayers being whispered. The German attack was imminent, and James knew with cold certainty that once it began, he couldn't be spared from command. Every second he delayed here was a second taken from men he might still save. Tommy seemed to read his thoughts. "You've got that look again," he said, "like at Passchendaele, when you had to choose between two wounded men. Remember what you told me afterward?" James remembered. They'd shared a bottle of contraband whiskey, and he'd tried to explain the brutal mathematics of battlefield medicine. How sometimes the hardest part wasn't the blood or the screams, but the choices, deciding who might live and who must die. "You said sometimes all we can do is make their passing easier," Tommy continued, "and hope someone would do the same for us." The morphine syringe felt heavy in James's hand. One dose, enough to ease Tommy's final moments. But that same dose might save another soldier, one with a chance to survive. "It's all right," Tommy said softly. "Save it for someone who needs it more. Just stay with me a moment longer." Outside, a whistle blew, the signal for final preparations. Miller appeared again at the entrance, his face showing the strain of holding back the urgent news James needed to hear. Tommy fumbled with something at his neck, his identity tags. With trembling fingers, he separated them, pressing one into James's hand. "So you'll remember," he said, "that some sacrifices are freely given." The weight of command pressed down on James. Heavier than any physical burden, he was a doctor who had sworn to preserve life, now forced to choose between staying with a dying friend and leading men who might still be saved. "Tommy, Go!" Tommy interrupted. "They need you more than I do now. Just tell my father I didn't waste what he taught me, about time and worth, and doing things proper." James gripped Tommy's hand one last time, feeling the calluses earned from years of delicate work. The hands of a craftsman, a healer in his own way, who had helped so many find moments of normalcy in the midst of war's chaos. "You were more than a friend," James said, his voice rough. "You helped me find my way back after William, showed me there was still purpose, and you showed me what it means to carry on, no matter the cost." Tommy's voice was fading, but his eyes remained clear. "Now go, show them one last time." The German guns were opening up, their first ranging shots falling behind the British lines. Soon the storm would break, and every second would count. James stood, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. He looked down at his friend one last time, seeing not the broken body, but the spirit that had helped him remember how to live after losing his son. "Goodbye, Tommy," he whispered. "Goodbye, sir." The title was new, a final gift, absolving him of any guilt for choosing duty over friendship. James straightened, feeling the weight of his officer's insignia, the responsibility it represented. He had a battle to fight, men to lead, lives to save, if he could. Tommy had given him that chance, that purpose, with his final understanding. Outside, the dawn was breaking, and with it came the sound of thousands of German boots, advancing through the mist toward their lines. The trench whistle felt foreign in James's hands, an instrument of war rather than healing. But when he blew it, the sound cut through the pre-dawn chill with surgical precision, calling his men to their final positions. "Listen carefully," he told the assembled sergeants, his voice carrying the authority of both doctor and commander. "The Germans know our weaknesses, but we know their plan. They're expecting to find a broken unit, disorganized and demoralized. Let's show them how wrong they are." Using Tommy's screwdriver as a pointer, he traced their defensive strategy on the mud wall of the trench. Each position had been chosen, with the care of a surgeon planning incision points, each field of fire calculated to maximize their limited ammunition. "They'll come in waves," he explained, remembering the captured documents. "Their first attack will probe our left flank, trying to draw our fire. Don't take the bait. Hold your positions. Hold your fire until you see their main assault force." The men nodded, their faces showing the grim determination of soldiers who knew the odds but would fight anyway. James saw William in their eyes, that same mix of fear and courage that his son must have felt before his final charge. "Miller, get the vicar's gun moved to the secondary position. They'll be expecting it on the left. We'll use their own intelligence against them." The sergeant hurried off, leaving James to continue his instructions. "Check your ammunition now. Every round counts. If your rifle jams, fall back to the secondary trench. We've got spare weapons there." He didn't mention how few spares they actually had. His wounded shoulder throbbed with each movement, but he forced himself to demonstrate the fallback procedure. The men needed to see strength in their commander, needed to believe that victory was possible despite the overwhelming odds. "Sir," one of the younger sergeants spoke up. "What about the wounded?" James felt Tommy's dog tags pressing against his chest, a reminder of the choices war demanded. Walking wounded, stay and fight for the others. He paused, his doctor's training warring with tactical necessity. "For the others, we do what we can. But our primary mission is to hold this line. Everything else is secondary." The words tasted bitter, but they were necessary. He had already made the hardest choice, leaving Tommy. Now he had to lead these men through whatever came next. a runner arrived with the final ammunition count. James studied the numbers, his medical mind automatically calculating odds of survival. They would have to be perfect in their timing, surgical in their precision. One mistake, one wasted burst of fire, and the entire position could collapse. "They think they know our weaknesses," he told his men, tucking Tommy's screwdriver back into his pocket. "But they don't know our strength. Every man here has lost friends, seen comrades fall. But we're still standing, still fighting." The German artillery was intensifying, their ranging shots getting closer. Soon the real barrage would begin. James checked his watch. Tommy would have appreciated the irony of time's importance in these final moments. "Remember your training. Remember why we're here. The reinforcements are coming, but we have to hold until they arrive. Every minute we delay them saves lives behind our lines." He looked at each man in turn, committing their faces to memory as he had done with so many patients. Some he had treated, patching wounds and easing pain. Now he was sending them back into harm's way. Any questions? There were none. They understood their roles, their responsibilities. James had one final thing to add. "I've seen what you're capable of, as your doctor and now as your commander. Whatever happens next, I'm proud to stand with you." The men dispersed to their positions, moving with the quiet efficiency of veteran soldiers. James made one last round of inspection, checking fields of fire, ensuring everyone knew the signals for falling back. The German guns were finding their range now. Their shells were falling with increasing accuracy, walking closer to the British trenches. Through his field glasses, James could see the enemy infantry forming up, their grey uniforms a smudge against the lightening sky. Dawn was coming, and with it the storm that would test every man's strength, every leader's resolve, every friend's loyalty. James touched the pocket holding William's photograph and Tommy's dog tags. Then he raised the whistle to his lips, ready to signal the beginning of their last stand. The empty ammunition box at James's feet told its own story. Each spent cartridge represented a life preserved or taken, each remaining round a decision yet to be made. He had positioned himself where he could both direct the defense and tend to the wounded, his medical bag and officer's pistol side by side in bitter necessity. The German barrage reached its crescendo. Shells burst overhead, their shrapnel rattling against helmets and timber supports like deadly rain. Through the explosions came the sound James had been waiting for, the sharp, distinctive bark of the Vickers gun from its new position. "Hold your fire!" he shouted as the first wave of German infantry emerged from the mist. "Wait for the main force." His men showed remarkable discipline, watching through their rifle sights as the enemy scouts probed their lines. James counted the seconds, timing the German advance against the schedule found in their captured documents. 3 minutes until their main assault. A soldier stumbled back from his position, blood streaming from a scalp wound. James's medical instincts took over. He quickly cleaned and bandaged the injury, his hands steady despite his own pain. "Can you still shoot?" he asked. The soldier nodded. "Then back to your post. Aim for their officers. They'll be the ones with map cases." 2 minutes now. The German scouts were withdrawing, no doubt reporting that the British line appeared lightly. "Held." James allowed himself a grim smile. "Let them think they'd found an easy target. Get ready," he called, loud enough to be heard along the line, but not so far as to reach enemy ears. His men tensed, rifles trained on the killing ground before them. The attack came exactly on schedule. German stormtroopers burst from their trenches in coordinated waves, each group moving with practiced precision. But they were advancing directly into the trap James had set, their own intelligence betraying them. "Now," he ordered. The Vickers opened up from its unexpected position, catching the German assault from an angle their reconnaissance hadn't shown. Rifle fire joined the cacophony as James's men finally unleashed their carefully hoarded ammunition. The first wave of attackers fell back in confusion, but more followed, always more. The Germans were committed now, throwing their elite troops against the British line with desperate determination. A shell burst collapsed part of the trench to James's left. He rushed to help dig out the buried men, his wounded shoulder screaming. In protest, 2 soldiers were saved. One was beyond help. No time to dwell on it. The attack was pressing closer. "Mills bombs!" he shouted as the Germans reached the wire. Their wire-cutting teams were working frantically to create paths for the infantry behind them. The grenades wreaked havoc among the clustered men, but still they came on. James fired his pistol at an officer who'd made it through the wire, seeing him fall even as more Germans pushed forward. The attack was following the exact pattern shown in their captured plans, but knowing their strategy wasn't enough to stop the sheer weight of numbers. "Fall back to the secondary positions," he ordered, as the first German soldiers reached there. Trench, hand-to-hand fighting erupted in several places. The horrible intimacy of close combat, where every death had a face. His men withdrew in good order, maintaining their fire as they moved to prepared positions. James helped a wounded private hobble back, pausing only to grab the ammunition box. Empty now, but they would need every container for the remaining bullets. The secondary line was shorter, easier to defend with their depleted numbers. But James knew it was only a temporary respite. The Germans would regroup, bring up fresh troops, coordinate another attack. Their captured documents outlined 3 waves of assault. This was only the first. He moved along the line, checking wounds, redistributing ammunition, offering quiet words of encouragement. The men were holding, but for how long? Their casualties were mounting, their ammunition dwindling with each German probe. Yet they had bloodied the enemy's nose. The attack was behind schedule now, disrupted by their unexpected resistance. Every minute gained was another minute closer to the promised reinforcements. If they could just hold out, a familiar sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive cough of German mortars setting up. James checked his watch, grimacing at both the time and his wound. The second wave would be coming soon, and this time the Germans would know what they were facing. He touched Tommy's dog tags through his shirt, drawing strength from the memory of his friend's courage. Then he turned to prepare his men for the storm yet to come. The first true light of dawn revealed the cost of their resistance. Bodies lay tangled in the wire, both British and German, their uniforms now sharing the same mud-brown hue. James studied the battlefield through his field glasses, trying to ignore how his wounded shoulder made even this simple act painful. In his pocket, Tommy's last drawing crinkled, the sketch of sunrise he'd never lived to see. The real dawn was different from his imagined one, harder and colder, but no less meaningful for that. "Third wave forming up, sir," Miller reported, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "They're bringing up flamethrowers." James nodded. The captured documents had warned of this. The Germans' final push would use every weapon at their disposal. His men were down to their last magazines, some with just 5 rounds left. The Vickers had fallen silent 10 minutes ago, its final belt spent in holding back the second assault. "Pass the word," he ordered. "Fix bayonets. Save your last rounds for the flamethrower teams. If they get close enough to use those weapons, we're finished." His wound was definitely infected now. Even the slightest movement sent waves of fire through his chest, and the fever made it hard to focus, but he couldn't rest, couldn't show weakness, not with the final German assault about to break over them. A young private handed him a message from their rear observation post. James read it twice, making sure his fever wasn't making him see things. Large dust cloud approaching from south. Possibly reinforcements. Hope was dangerous in battle. It made men hesitate, made them think about survival when they needed to focus on fighting. But James had to admit the possibility if the promised reinforcements were finally arriving. 5 minutes. The warning came down the line. German officers were checking their watches, synchronizing the final attack. Their strategy was still running like clockwork, despite the delays James's men had caused. He thought of Tommy then, of his friend's understanding of timing and sacrifice. The Germans were like one of Tommy's watches, precise, mechanical, every piece moving in coordination. But watches could be disrupted by the smallest grain of sand, and armies could be thrown off by unexpected resistance. "Listen to me," he called to his remaining men. "We've hurt them badly, blown their schedule to hell. Now we just need to hold. A little longer. Help is coming." Whether the men believed him or not, they straightened at their posts. Some were wounded but still fighting, others exhausted beyond measure but refusing to yield. James felt a fierce pride in them all. The German artillery opened up again, their shells now falling with deadly accuracy on the British positions. Under cover of the barrage, their infantry began advancing, not in waves this time, but in small groups, working their way forward behind a rolling smoke screen. "Steady," James called. "Wait for my signal." He could see the flamethrower teams now, their heavy tanks making them awkward targets. Behind them came the stormtroopers, veterans of a dozen breakthrough attacks. This would be their final push, aimed at overwhelming the British line through sheer violence and shock. James raised his whistle to his lips, ignoring the pain the movement caused. The Germans were almost to the first belt of wire. The sound that cut through the battle wasn't his whistle. It was something deeper, more mechanical, the rumble of engines. Through his field glasses, James saw them. Tanks, British tanks, advancing through the morning mist. Behind them came waves of infantry, bayonets gleaming in the dawn light. "Reinforcements," the cry went up along the line. But the German attack couldn't be called back now. Their troops were committed, charging forward even as British artillery began falling among them. Now! James blew his whistle, triggering the last coordinated volley from his men. They aimed for the flamethrower teams first, just as ordered. The heavy weapons made their carriers slow, vulnerable. One after another they fell. The German attack faltered, caught between the defenders' fire and the approaching British counterattack. Their precise timing, so carefully planned, fell apart in the chaos of unexpected resistance. Through it all, James remained standing, directing his men's fire, watching as the tide of battle turned. The sunrise Tommy had drawn seemed to come alive around them, its light revealing not just the carnage of war, but the triumph of human endurance. They had held. Against all odds, against overwhelming force, they had held their ground and kept their honor. The cost had been terrible. In friends lost, in wounds taken, in innocence shattered. But as the reinforcements finally reached their position, James knew that every sacrifice had served its purpose. The dawn had come, bringing with it both victory and validation. Tommy would have appreciated the timing. The field hospital report lay unfinished on James's lap, its clinical language failing to capture the true measure of what had happened. How could mere numbers convey the cost of their stand? 37 dead, 52 wounded, 16 missing, each figure representing a story that would never be fully told. His own wound was finally being treated, a young doctor carefully cleaning and bandaging his shoulder. The infection had spread, but they'd caught it in time. Unlike so many others, he would survive to fight another day. "You should rest, sir," the doctor advised, finishing the bandage. "That fever needs proper attention." But James couldn't rest, not yet. There were still duties to perform, responsibilities that couldn't wait for his recovery. He pushed himself up from the cot, ignoring the pain that radiated through his chest. Miller found him checking on the wounded, moving from cot to cot with the determination of a man running on willpower alone. The sergeant's uniform was torn and bloodied, but he stood straight as he delivered his report. "Final casualty count from the German side, sir. We estimate over 300 dead in front of our wire, twice that number wounded. They're still bringing in prisoners, mostly young lads who'd never seen action before." James nodded, remembering the faces he'd seen through his field glasses. So many of them looking like William, like Tommy in their youth and uncertainty. The tragedy of war knew no borders, respected no uniforms. "And our position?" "Holding firm now." The reinforcements have fully integrated into the line. Engineers are already repairing the damage. Miller paused. They found something in the dugout, sir. Thought you should have it. He held out Tommy's notebook, somehow survived the shelling that had collapsed part of the dugout. Its pages were stained with mud and worse, but the drawings inside remained clear, precious fragments of humanity preserved in pencil strokes. "Thank you, Sergeant." James's voice was rough. What about the body?" "We'll bury him proper, sir, with the others who held the line." A stretcher team passed by, carrying another wounded man to surgery. James watched them go, his doctor's instincts noting their technique, their careful handling of their patient. Even after everything, the habits of healing remained. He made his way to where the dead were being prepared for burial. Tommy lay among them, his face peaceful. Despite the violence that had claimed him, someone had cleaned away the blood and mud, restored a measure of dignity to his broken body. James knelt beside his friend, ignoring the protest from his wound. Carefully he placed Tommy's notebook and screwdriver with him. A craftsman should be buried with his tools. But the dog tags he kept, one to send to Tommy's father, one to keep as a reminder of what duty and sacrifice truly meant. "Dr. Morton," a junior officer approached, holding a message. "Command wants your preliminary report. They're saying your stand may have saved the entire sector. There's talk of commendations." "Later," James cut him off. "The time for reports. And medals would come. But this moment belonged to the dead, to Tommy, to William, to all the sons and brothers who had given everything in service to something greater than themselves. He felt in his pocket for the last drawing Tommy had given him, the sketch of sunrise over the trenches. It seemed right to keep this one, this final glimpse of beauty, seen through his friend's watchmaker's eyes. The day was growing warm, the sun climbing higher over the battlefield. Already details were being lost, shell holes filling with water, blood sinking into the thirsty earth, the sharp edges of memory beginning to soften. Soon there would be new troops in the line, new faces learning the geography of their trenches, new stories beginning even as others ended. But some things would remain constant. The weight of command, the burden of choice, the endless calculation of lives saved against lives lost. James touched his wounded shoulder, feeling the fresh bandage beneath his uniform. He was both doctor and soldier now, healer and warrior, carrying the contradictions of his duty like battle scars. Miller appeared again. "Sir, the men are asking. They want to know if you'll say something. At the burial." James looked at Tommy's peaceful face one last time. Yes, there would be words to say, lessons to share, memories to preserve. But first, there were the living to tend to, wounds to heal, a line to hold. He stood, straightened his uniform, and turned to face the responsibilities that remained. The memorial plaque was heavier than James expected, its bronze surface catching the afternoon light as he turned it in his hands. "He died for freedom and honor," read the inscription, the same words that had accompanied William's plaque, now duplicated for Tommy Bennett. The army called them dead man's pennies, these tokens sent to grieving families. James had been writing the accompanying letter for hours, trying to find words worthy of Tommy's sacrifice. The official language felt inadequate, too formal to capture the spirit of the young watchmaker who had found beauty even in war's darkness. "Your son," he wrote, "taught me about time, not just its measurement, but its meaning. In our darkest hours, he helped us remember that every moment has value, that even in war there are things worth preserving." Through his office window at the field hospital, James could see new troops moving up to the line. His shoulder was healing well enough for him to return to duty, though the doctors had recommended a posting further from the front. He had declined. His place was here, where he could best serve both as physician and commander. The citation for his military cross lay unopened on his desk. The medal itself would come later, but James found he couldn't share in the army's celebration of their stand. Victory had cost too much, the price paid in currency too precious to measure. Miller knocked and entered, carrying another stack of letters to be censored. The sergeant had refused promotion, preferring to stay with the medical unit where he felt he could do the most good. Like James, he carried the memory of that dawn in ways that defied military recognition. "Sir," he said, placing the letters down, "we've had word from the new men in the line. They found something you should see." From his pocket, Miller produced a piece of paper, carefully preserved in an oilskin wrapper. It was one of Tommy's drawings, discovered in a dugout wall where he must have hidden it just before that final night. The sketch showed James tending to a wounded soldier, every line capturing the careful determination of a healer at work. "The men have been asking about him," Miller said quietly. "The stories spread up and down the line, the watchmaker who helped hold back the German tide. Some say they can still hear his pocket watch ticking in the quiet hours before dawn." James smiled at that. Tommy would have appreciated becoming part of the trench's folklore, his story joining the countless others that soldiers shared to make sense of their experiences. "What they did, what you all did, it meant something, sir," Miller continued. "That German offensive was meant to break through our entire sector. Instead we bought time," James finished, "at a terrible price." He reached for his medical bag, now restored to its proper organization. Inside, alongside the bandages and morphine syringes, he kept Tommy's screwdriver. Sometimes, between treating wounds and writing condolence letters, he would hold it and remember his friend's words about sacrifice and purpose. The official history would record their action as a tactical victory, a determined defense that disrupted enemy plans and saved countless lives. But James knew the true story lay in the smaller details, in Tommy's drawings, in the quiet courage of men who held their ground, in the bonds forged between soldiers who became more than comrades. "We're keeping a record," Miller said, gesturing to the letters. "Stories from the men who were there, thought the families might want to know." James nodded, understanding the importance of preserving these memories. He thought of his own son's letters, so carefully kept by Margaret, each one a testament to William's spirit and sacrifice. From the training grounds came the sound of new recruits drilling, learning the lessons that might keep them alive in the battles to come. James had spoken to them yesterday, trying to convey what he had learned about courage and duty and the price of victory. He picked up his pen again, returning to the letter for Tommy's father. There was more to say about friendship and sacrifice, about finding meaning in the darkest moments, about a young man who had faced death with the same precision he had brought to repairing watches. "Your son," he wrote, "taught us that time is measured not in hours or minutes, but in the moments we choose to stand, to help, to heal. He gave his life not just for king and country, but for the friends beside him and the principle that some things are worth any price." The pressed poppy lay between the pages of James's war diary, its red petals preserved like a memory frozen in time. He had picked it from no man's land the day after their stand, a splash of life amid the battlefield's destruction. Now it marked the page where he had written about Tommy's last hours. Years would pass, but he would never forget that dawn, the weight of command on his shoulders, the impossible choice between friend and duty, the way Tommy had understood and forgiven him, even before the choice was made. His wound had healed, leaving a scar that ached in cold weather. Like Tommy's pocket watch, stopped at the moment of impact, it marked a specific point in time, a moment when everything changed, when duty and sacrifice had merged into a single, unavoidable truth. The trench line had shifted since then. The battlefield's geography transformed by subsequent attacks and counterattacks. But the lessons remained, about courage and friendship, about the different ways men could be healers in a world bent on destruction. He kept Tommy's dog tags with William's photograph, these tokens of the sons he had lost to war. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between treating patients, he would hold them and remember. The watchmaker and the cricket player, each teaching him something vital about time and its measurement. Tommy's father had written back a letter of such grace and understanding that James had wept upon reading it. "My son died as he lived," the old watchmaker had written, helping to mend what was broken, keeping faith with those who trusted him. I could ask for no finer ending to his story. The war would grind on, claiming more sons, more brothers, more friends. But James remained at his post, treating the wounded and leading his men, finding purpose in the dual roles of healer and commander. Tommy's screwdriver stayed in his medical bag, a reminder that some repairs required both precision and sacrifice. In time, he came to understand that Tommy had given him more than friendship. He had shown him how to live with loss, how to find meaning in duty, how to measure success not in victories, but in moments of grace under pressure. And so James carried on, marking time not by watches or calendars, but by lives saved, by wounds healed, by the countless small acts of courage he witnessed every day. In doing so, he honored both his sons, William, who had taught him about sacrifice, and Tommy, who had shown him how to survive it. The poppy would fade, as all things must, but the truth it represented would remain, pressed between the pages of memory like a flower preserved in time, that some moments, though costly, were worth any price, and that the greatest honor we can do the fallen is to carry their legacy forward, one healing hand at a time.